1. The mask of the world and the naked soul of goodness. Imagine stepping into a grand ballroom filled with elegantly dressed people, each one wearing a mask. Some masks wear wide smiles, others quiet frowns, but none of them reveal the face underneath. Behind every mask is a motive, a calculation, a shield crafted not just to hide, but to survive. Now imagine walking into that same room without a mask, bare-faced, heart wide open, without deception or defense. No desire to manipulate, no interest in playing the game. How long would you last? How soon would you be cast as naive, dismissed as weak, or even mocked as a fool? This is the dilemma at the heart of Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Idiot, where Prince Myshkin, a man of unwavering sincerity and unguarded goodness, steps into a society built on masks. He is not a fool in intellect or intelligence. In fact, he sees more clearly than most. His mind is sound, but it is his heart that leads. He is guided by kindness, by empathy, by a belief that people are better than they seem. But the world he enters is not made for men like him. His virtues are not valued. They are weaponized against him. His honesty is interpreted as stupidity. His forgiveness is seen as weakness. His trust is treated like a flaw. The society around him cannot understand, and worse, cannot tolerate. Myshkin becomes a mirror reflecting not just the ugliness of others, but the falseness they hide behind. His very presence is unsettling because it reveals a truth that most would rather ignore, that goodness, when it does not conform, becomes a threat. Dostoevsky uses Myshkin not simply to show us a good man, but to show us a world that has no place for one. And in doing so, he holds up a mirror to us, asking not whether Myshkin is too good for this world, but whether we have made this world too cruel for the good. But what if the rejection of goodness isn't a flaw in society, but a strategy woven deep into how we survive? In the next chapter, we uncover the hidden code of social behavior and why true kindness is often the most dangerous thing you can show. 2. Why true kindness feels threatening. To understand why someone like Myshkin evokes such discomfort, we need to look deeper into how people relate to one another beneath the surface. Society, for all its polished manners and moral speeches, functions on a delicate architecture of unspoken rules. Every interaction is a negotiation. Every smile a strategy. Every favor a quiet exchange expecting something in return. This is not always malicious. It's simply how people learn to survive in a world where vulnerability is risky. And in this landscape, someone like Myshkin is not just unusual, he's disruptive. He does not calculate before he speaks. He does not withhold to protect his image. He gives without keeping score. In a world trained to see kindness as a currency, his generosity feels like a glitch in the system. People don't know how to respond to it. They question his motives, suspect some hidden agenda, or worse, assume he's incapable of understanding the world he lives in. But Myshkin understands all too well. He sees clearly what others pretend not to. And it's precisely this clarity, this refusal to play by the rules, that threatens those around him. Psychologists describe a concept called cognitive dissonance, the internal discomfort we feel when we are confronted with someone or something that contradicts our self-image. Myshkin's presence creates that dissonance. People who pride themselves on being kind suddenly feel performative. Those who believe they're honest sense the weight of their white lies. He doesn't shame them. He doesn't even try to change them. But in doing nothing at all simply by being himself, he exposes the compromises others have made. And that exposure hurts. It forces people to reckon with what they've become. Most aren't ready for that. So they call him Navi. They label him a fool. And they walk away feeling justified in their rejection. But rejection is only the beginning. In the next part, we'll explore why Myshkin's gentle presence doesn't just disturb individuals, it threatens the entire moral order they've built their lives upon. 3. When goodness disrupts the moral order. Myshkin's presence is more than a personal discomfort. It's a systemic disruption. In a society where power is masked as charm and manipulation wears the face of civility, true goodness doesn't just seem impractical, it feels dangerous. Because it reveals the illusion at the heart of the entire structure. The social world operates like a silent marketplace where people trade favors, affections, and performances. Even kindness is often offered with subtle expectations. To give without asking, to forgive without remembering, to love without guarding. These acts destabilize the entire logic of transactional life. Myshkin lives by a code that doesn't belong to this system, and that's precisely why he doesn't fit anywhere within it. He threatens the invisible contracts people rely on to navigate relationships. He is immune to flattery, indifferent to status, and uninterested in power. His sincerity renders cunning useless. His compassion disarms control. Around him, the usual tools of manipulation stop working, and that terrifies those who depend on them. But the tragedy is not just that people reject him, it's that they don't even understand why. They feel uneasy, exposed, perhaps even judged, though Myshkin himself never condemns. His presence becomes a kind of moral gravity, pulling people closer to their own inner contradictions. And that is unbearable, because to acknowledge his way of being would require re-examining their own. So they isolate him. They redefine his virtue as weakness. They mock what they secretly long for, simply because it is too pure to be replicated. In doing so, they preserve their comfort but lose their connection to something more essential. Myshkin does not resist this fate. He does not fight back. He simply continues being who he is. And this silent defiance speaks louder than any protest ever could. But this raises a haunting question: can someone remain good when they are utterly alone? In the next chapter, we'll step into Myshkin's solitude and examine the hidden cost of choosing to be good in a world that no longer believes in goodness. 4. The loneliness of the good. There is a certain kind of loneliness that only the deeply good can understand. It is not the loneliness of physical isolation or social exclusion. It is the loneliness of moral clarity in a world addicted to compromise. Myshkin does not belong anywhere because his presence makes others feel they don't belong to themselves. He does not wield power, yet he unsettles those who do. He does not raise his voice, yet he silences the performance in every room he enters. And in return, what he receives is not admiration, but abandonment. People do not hate him. They drift away from him, unsure of what they are feeling, unsure of why his kindness makes them feel so exposed. He becomes, paradoxically, both invisible and unforgettable. The man everyone overlooks, and the man no one can forget. And through it all, Myshkin never changes. He remains soft. He continues to believe in the goodness of others, even when they offer him only their worst. He forgives before apologies arrive. He hopes where others have long since turned bitter. And in doing so, he bears the full weight of the world's disillusionment on shoulders that never asked to carry anything but love. This is the silent cost of radical goodness. It is not rewarded. It is rarely even understood. But it demands everything. To live without armor in a world that sharpens itself against you is not weakness. It is perhaps the greatest act of courage a soul can perform. And yet, it is also a slow and quiet unraveling. Because every rejection chips away at something, at the belief that love will be enough, that truth will matter, that goodness will endure. Myshkin carries this hope until it breaks him. And when it does, we are left to ask, was it worth it? In the next part, we'll confront that question head-on and explore whether goodness still holds meaning when all it brings is pain. 5. When goodness becomes pain. If goodness leads to suffering, what then is its value? This is the question that sits at the heart of Myshkin's tragedy, and perhaps at the center of our own quiet fears. We are taught to believe that goodness is its own reward, that to be kind is to attract kindness, that to live with integrity is to find peace. But what if none of that is true? What if goodness invites betrayal? What if it makes you vulnerable, weak, even disposable? Myshkin gives everything he has: his time, his attention, his heart, and yet he is not embraced. He is ridiculed, misunderstood, and ultimately broken. And Dostoevsky does not shield us from this truth. He forces us to witness it. He shows us that in a world built on self-interest, purity does not ascend, it is crushed. But this is not a meaningless tragedy. It is an invitation to look deeper, because history has shown us again and again that those who walk the path of truth and compassion rarely walk it without pain. From spiritual leaders to social reformers, those who embodied radical goodness were met with resistance, persecution, and often violent ends. Why? Because true goodness is disruptive. It threatens comfort. It unsettles the structures that people cling to for control. It challenges the lie that survival must come at the cost of the soul. Myshkin does not try to change the world, but his presence alone asks too much of it. He exposes what people would rather keep hidden, and in return, they destroy him not out of cruelty, but out of fear. So if goodness leads to pain, does that mean it has failed? Or does it mean it has done exactly what it was meant to do? In the next part, we'll explore the most uncomfortable possibility of all that suffering may not be the failure of goodness, but the very proof that it is real. 6. The proof hidden in the pain. What if suffering is not the failure of goodness, but its most honest companion? What if the presence of pain is not a warning to turn back, but confirmation that you are still walking the right path, one most people avoid? Myshkin does not view his suffering as injustice. He does not curse the world for failing to understand him. He does not retreat into bitterness or vengeance. Instead, he remains steady, fragile, yes, but unshaken in his core. And this is where Dostoevsky's vision becomes radical, because the world does not validate Myshkin's goodness. It crushes it, and yet it cannot erase it. Through rejection, ridicule, and emotional collapse, Myshkin does not betray himself. That is his quiet victory. A triumph invisible to those who measure life by reward, applause, or recognition. In the eyes of society, Myshkin loses. But in the silence of his own soul, he remains undefeated. This is not the logic we are taught. We are raised to believe that value lies in impact. That strength is defined by success. That virtue should bear fruit, or else it is foolish. But Myshkin reminds us that real goodness is not transactional. It does not ask what it will gain. It does not measure its worth by the reaction it receives. It exists because it must. Because to abandon it would be to abandon the self. And yet the paradox remains. If goodness changes nothing, if it leaves the world untouched, and the person who holds it broken, then where is its power? What does it achieve? The answer is difficult, and it requires us to shift how we define change itself. In the next chapter, we'll uncover the hidden force within Myshkin's silent presence, the transformation it brings, not through action or argument, but through the unsettling clarity of simply existing as he is. 7. The power of silent transformation. True goodness rarely announces itself. It does not demand recognition, nor does it insist on being seen. And yet, it changes everything it touches, not loudly, not immediately, but undeniably. Myshkin does not preach. He does not try to reform those around him. He does not impose his values on anyone. He simply exists kind, honest, forgiving. And that existence becomes a quiet force that shakes the foundation of those he encounters. Even the people who reject him cannot remain untouched. Even the ones who laugh at him carry some piece of him away. This is the kind of influence that can't be quantified. It doesn't show up in numbers or victories, but it lingers in the conscience, in the heart, in the subtle ways people begin to see themselves differently. Perhaps they feel shame. Perhaps they feel wonder. Perhaps they don't know what they feel, but they feel something that wasn't there before. That is the power of goodness when it is stripped of performance. It reveals, not through confrontation, but through presence. Not by pointing out the darkness in others, but by embodying the light they've forgotten. Myshkin becomes a mirror not of judgment, but of possibility. He reminds people not just of what they are, but of what they could be. And in a world obsessed with control, that is deeply unsettling. Because real goodness offers no leverage. It cannot be bargained with. It cannot be owned. And yet it remains. That permanence is what makes it dangerous, and beautiful, and unforgettable. So even as Myshkin fades from the rooms he once walked through, something of him remains. A silence that speaks. A presence that echoes. But if his goodness leaves a mark, even in rejection, what does that say about the soul of those who reject him? In the next part, we'll confront how the world protects itself from that kind of impact by twisting virtue into foolishness and turning light into something unbearable. 8. When light becomes unbearable. The tragedy of Myshkin is not just that people reject him, it's how they justify that rejection. They don't say he's too kind. They say he's foolish. They don't admit he's too honest. They insist he doesn't understand how the world works. Virtue becomes misdiagnosed as stupidity. Integrity becomes repackaged as weakness. Why? Because it is easier to mock what we don't want to face than to admit we are afraid of what it demands from us. Myshkin's goodness is not passive, it is disruptive. Not because he tries to change others, but because his very being exposes what they have compromised. People say they value kindness, but when faced with real, unconditional compassion, they recoil. Because it shines a light on everything they've buried, the lies they tell themselves, the small betrayals they justify, the ambitions that quietly eroded their ideals. In Myshkin, they see not a saint, but a reminder, a reflection of the innocence they lost and the courage they lacked. And instead of embracing it, they push it away. They protect themselves with cynicism. They create narratives that frame him as unstable, unrealistic, unfit, because the alternative that he might be right would demand they rethink their lives. That is too high a cost. So they exile him, not because he harms them, but because he makes them feel too deeply. His love is too unconditional, his trust too unwavering, his hope too honest. And those qualities, when held up against the masks of modern life, become unbearable. So the world twists his image, turns him into a caricature, labels him with a word that seems harmless but is heavy with dismissal, the idiot. But who, truly, is the fool, the one who stays loyal to his soul, or the ones who silence it out of fear? In the next chapter, we confront this inversion head-on and ask whether Myshkin, in being broken, reveals the most courageous truth of all. 9. The silent victory of staying true. Myshkin's end is not triumphant in the way we expect stories of the good to conclude. There are no crowds cheering, no vindication, no redemption through worldly success. Instead, there is collapse, misunderstanding, a quiet fading into the background. But Dostoevsky does not present this as defeat. On the contrary, he presents it as the final proof of strength. Myshkin is broken but not bent. He does not lose himself in bitterness. He does not conform to the world that rejects him. He does not retreat into a safer version of himself. He remains true, even when that truth costs him everything. That is not weakness. That is the definition of inner power. In a society built on masks, the most radical act is to remain visible. In a culture built on strategy, the purest courage is to remain sincere. And Myshkin, in his refusal to become anything but himself, wins a deeper kind of battle, one that does not take place in politics or wealth or reputation, but in the soul. We often associate victory with change, with winning people over, with leaving a legacy that reshapes the world. But what if the real measure of a life is not in how much we move others, but in how little the world is able to move us away from who we truly are? Myshkin does not leave behind revolutions, but he leaves behind something quieter, something more enduring. A question, a memory, a dissonance. For those who met him, he becomes impossible to forget, not because he demanded attention, but because he embodied something they had long abandoned. And perhaps that is the secret power of goodness. It lingers. It haunts. It whispers long after the noise of cruelty is past. And though it may seem to vanish, it plants seeds silent, unseen, transformative. So when the world calls him a fool, we are left to wonder, was he the only one who saw clearly all along? In the final chapter, we return to the heart of the question and discover why, even when no one notices, choosing to be good might still be the most powerful act of all. 10. the final choice. So what then remains? If goodness goes unseen, unrewarded, even punished, why choose it? Why walk a path lined with misunderstanding, where love is met with suspicion and truth feels like solitude? Myshkin's life does not offer easy answers. It offers something harder, something more real, a choice. In a world that insists you must become something else to survive, will you stay who you are? In a world that calls your sincerity foolishness, your softness weakness, your compassion impractical, will you still choose them anyway? Myshkin does. And in that choice, he reveals the true meaning of strength. Not dominance, not control, but integrity. The refusal to become hardened, even when the world tries to shatter you. The decision to keep loving, even when love is not returned. The courage to tell the truth, even when it earns you nothing but silence. That is not failure. That is a different kind of victory. One that cannot be measured in applause or legacy, but in the quiet knowing that you did not betray yourself. And maybe that is enough. Maybe the purpose of goodness is not to change the world in obvious ways, but to make it harder for darkness to fully take hold. To leave a trace of something honest behind. A light, a presence, a story. Yours. Because every act of kindness, every moment of truth, every refusal to hate when hatred is easy, these things matter. Even if no one sees them. Especially then. So the final revelation is this: goodness is not about being praised. It is not about winning. It is not even about being remembered. It is about being real. And in a world so deeply afraid of what is real, that might be the most powerful act of all. If this story touched something in you, take a moment. Reflect on what part of yourself you've hidden to fit in. And if you feel ready, begin to bring that part back. Quietly, gently, unapologetically. And if you know someone who still dares to be good in a world like this, thank them. Share this with them. Or better yet, become one of them.